Hey, what is up, you guys? It's Kat, and again, Stephanie Forbes speaking to us from the perspective of SCM and what to look for what things to keep in mind when you're implementing ERP. And so, if you recall, Stephanie is our expert in the SEM space. She is a speaker. She's been a senior leader in large scale organizations in the SEM area, and she's helped many organizations actually go through both their ERP roadmap and the implementation of ERPs. She is such a wealth of information with regards to what to look for when you're crafting your RFP, developing your contracts. The last week we had talked about things to look for in terms of how to compensate your systems integration or systems integrators or people who are helping you to implement your ERP, and how to compensate and motivate the various different stakeholders in your organization so that your whole entire organization is moving forward as one tight unit. And so, welcome again, Stephanie. We're so excited to have you. We are going to be talking about
People.
Yay! I love talking about people. Humans is where it's at. I'm going to tell you that right now.
100%. And thanks again, Kat, for welcoming me on your show. I'm very excited again once to be here.
Excellent.
Once again to be here. Oh, I said that backwards.
All good, all good. And so again, yeah, to recap, the last time we had a really, really great discussion about contract considerations. What are the usual culprits for change orders? And this time even when we were discussing things about the, RFP and what to look for in terms of contract, we actually kind of naturally migrated to the people aspect, right? And so,
100%.
where should we begin our conversation about people?
So, Kat, I think for today, I'd like to break it down into three levels. So we've got our board/executive level. We've got our project leadership or ERP team leadership. And then we've got operational users or your front lines. So your actual transaction holders. So I think if we start off with those sort of three levels of people and kind of navigate our way through those, I think it might be the most helpful, because I think most of your audience could probably relate to being one or the other in those buckets. And I apologize if I missed anyone. I just tried to make it really simple for the purposes of our discussion today.
I think that's a great idea.
So I think part of the first place to start off with would be answering the why. And I think Simon Sinek says it best with,
Start with
always
why.
begin with the why in mind. And so, for each of those groups, right, you want to start off with, why are we doing this? What is the eventual outcome? What's the goal? And just really making sure that you have the same goal. So the organization, which includes us at the board level, our executive team, all of the people implementing it, as well as everyone who's going to end up using it, all 100% have the same goal. The goal is X. Our clear timelines and expectations for each of you are Y. And then I'd like to provide reassurance, generally speaking, as you're doing this, that the individuals who may feel threatened, that this is a really good opportunity for you to expand and learn something new. Because I think oftentimes, and especially with this big push on AI and generative AI and everything else, everyone's like, oh my God, I'm going to be out of a job. The reality of the situation is really boring, routine things are going to be automated. The things that require, creative thought and critical thinking and the ability to overcome something that isn't routine always will require human intervention. And that's where what you're going to see happen is, the majority of automated items are going to move to maybe like an AI type program or an automated program, but we still need people to do other things that fall outside that, even within that sort of range of job duties. And let's also remember that AI is very new. So everyone's riding this huge wave of fantastic expectations and delight and like, oh, it's going to do all these things. And very soon we're going to have like the trough of disillusion. I think it's called the trough of disillusionment. Blah. I'm gonna try and use my words better today. The trough of disillusionment, and that's where like, well, it doesn't do this, it doesn't do this, it did this all wrong, it didn't understand, an area code in a different format, right? And so you're gonna have, a sort of a bit of a check balance here in the next little while. So I think making sure that people understand that there's always room for humans, and that humans are desperately needed to help make all of these things tick, and that it isn't a elimination, it's a redesign, and a redesign hopefully for most people of doing more fun things within their scope as opposed to more drudgery and things that aren't nearly as fun and exciting. So that's kind of where I would start as sort of an overall arching piece. And then I'm just going to walk through if you want, and then of course you're going to jump in, but I'd like to walk through, we'll go through board, project, and then users.
Yes, that'd be great.
So the big considerations with individuals at the board level is making sure that the teams are aligned. And we had touched on this briefly last podcast, but what they need to make sure they're aligned on are the metrics. So really ensuring that all of the individuals within the C-suite are compensated or are driven to a series of KPIs based on the same metrics, goals, or outcomes. So this is making sure that your operational group, your technical group, your human resources group, your supply chain group, all of those groups have the same KPI, which is to deliver the ERP. If your operational group is to deliver on margin to EBITDA, and your HR and your soft functional skills, are driven to implement the ERP, you're going to have a huge disconnect and infighting within the organization. So those annual incentive performance metrics, or AIP is what they're commonly referred to, need to be the same top down within the organization for the entire duration of your ERP implementation. You may even want to consider those metrics to be the same for any post-go live enhancements. So we had also talked about a little bit about that last time, where you might have an enhancement piece or an improvement or data cleansing or some other thing beyond the original implementation that you maybe realized during implementation or during assessment of some of your data sets, that you're like, hey, this would be a really great project. 100% it probably would be after implementation. So all of those, as they start to stack up, you also want to make sure that those are also part of your annual incentive performance metrics to make sure that all of the people are aligned. It's the board and the executive level's job to ensure that they are communicating the right message. That message is clear. It has a goal that everyone shares. It has timelines and expectations for performance that falls across the organization and is consistent. If you have your chief operations officer saying something different than your chief technical officer, saying something different from your SVP of HR, you're going to end up with a real mixed bag results, and your ERP is not going to go as smoothly as it could be.
Right. So just a quick question here before we sort of move on. So you had mentioned obviously, lining up those API with the fact that with a successful implementation of ERP. But from a practical standpoint, it's really hard to say, oh, we're going to throw we're going to throw profitability to the wind and just focus on, dropping multi-millions of dollars in this ERP. So is there a balance that like what should do we say we keep the profitability metric at status quo, or because here's the thing, as a senior leader, I would be inclined to say, well, let's just sneak in a little bit of a profitability metric in there, right? So we're not going to go for 20% growth. We might go for 5% growth. But where is that delicate balance between a solid ERP that's going to set us up for years to come, and this is our one crack at it, like initial crack at it. If it's not set up right, then it's going to essentially it's going to screw us for years to come, right? To be blunt about it.
You're bang on, and that is an excellent, excellent question. So here's the thing. So you're building a house, and you got foundations, and you got walls, and you've got roof, and you're in the middle of foundations, and someone says, I just really want to start on the walls. I know the cement's still wet, but I would feel so much better if those walls started going up right now. Right. And your cement's wet. And you're like, well, but I think the wall's going to sink in on this side. Yeah, I know. But I feel really good about those walls being up. Like it's just a metric I just really can resonate with as opposed to stuff below the ground. So that's kind of how I liken an ERP implementation, is a little bit to building a house. If your foundation isn't set, if it's not strong, and if you don't take the time to do it, you will not have an adequate structure above. And 9 times out of 10, the majority of individuals within your organization can only focus on one priority. So I'm not saying that you have no other priorities other than ERP implementation, but the primary objective is your ERP implementation. If your revenue stays the same from last year to this year, if maybe it takes a slight dip, like 5%, that's within the realm of acceptability, because you need those resources to be deployed on your ERP. And your ERP is your foundation for your 5-year record-breaking epic performance. And it's going to probably take, not ignoring, but really allowing your margin or your profitability to take a bit of a backseat to making sure that you have that foundational piece correct. A poor implementation or the inability to get operational engagement really is going to impact your long-term success of your ERP, or you're going to spend 3 years fixing it at what cost, and then no one trusts the data, and the data's wrong, and you've got to restate your public statements on your financials because you had a triplicate error on something. Like there's always a problem with taking your focus away and making it 2 or 3 or 4 because you're trying to cover all your bases. If you're just implementing an ERP for 12 or 18 months, just do that. And with your operational groups, be really clear. This is your primary focus. Does that mean you do nothing else? No. But that means if the ERP team calls, you do their stuff first. You maintain our existing clients, and maybe there's some key requirements around maintenance of key clients or existing workloads, but you can only really truly have one priority. And I think that we get excited about 10 or 15 things being on an AIP, and we want to do them all, but we can't do them all, right? We have to really establish what the primary focus is and how we're going to deliver those results. So great question. I could probably talk about that for like an hour, but great question.
I as well. And so, okay, so this might actually set you up for your next piece here. But you had mentioned, okay, so one of the primary objectives of your C-suite executive is to have that aligned messaging communication to make sure that all of the teams in the organization are marching towards that same goal. What does that like, is that all they're doing? Or like, because coming from, like leadership in the operational areas will be like, oh, well, okay, so that's kind of easy. Like, just make sure that we're communicating. Great. What else can we do?
Yes, that's another great question. So it'll be like, well, I guess safety doesn't matter anymore, right? I'm in an operational space in oil and gas or construction. Well, so you're just saying ERP is the only thing and I don't have to worry about safety? No, we're not. Like that's a core foundational item to our key business. Safety still matters. Just saying, in terms of like driving towards a single goal for this year, that our goal for this year is to implement a successful ERP. We're going to continue to maintain our safety metrics. We're going to continue to maintain our excellence in customer service. We're going to continue to do all these things that we already do really well. But there's no expectation for you to go deliver, for example, like a 20% margin improvement or a 15% customer base growth, right? Like we're not expecting you to move heaven, earth, and mountain. We're expecting you to implement the CRP and to maintain where we are. And I think that is an acceptable level of performance after you explain the why.
Right.
And I think also when you do explain the why and you explain that the ERP is foundational and this is how it's going to continue to get us to grow, I think that you can end up having the majority of individuals on board. I do think the incentivization piece in terms of the successful ERP needs just to occur across the entire organization, right? Everyone's got 15% or 20% of their AIP is dedicated to successful implementation of the ERP, and then you'll get the results I think that you're looking for. That doesn't mean that you don't have safety and other things on there. It's just if only this group has it and this group doesn't have any of it, then you're going to end up with quite a void.
Okay. Excellent. Excellent. Would you actually bring in your change management at this point in time, or?
Yeah, so I would bring change management in to explain the why
Mm,
at the beginning, right? So I'd bring in the change management group in conjunction with your senior leadership team, whether that's your CEO, your COO, CTO, with your change management team, go through and explain the why, walk through the roadmap, explain the key milestones and deliverables. Each one, everyone, this is going to be your involvement based on your role in the organization to participate, provide feedback, that kind of thing. And then that's also where you'd establish clear timelines and expectations. We don't expect you to not voice your opinion, but we do expect you to be champions, right? So one of the things and I'm sure you've seen this in your vast experience of implementation, but you'll have, individuals that will be like, well, this isn't going to work. Well, that doesn't do this. This doesn't do that. We have these reports we're supposed to do, and that doesn't meet this client's need, and we need to be special.
yeah.
And I
Everyone's
think
special.
everyone's special, yes, of course. But establishing some of those key expectations becomes so critical. Like, you are expected to provide solutions. If you notice something that is not going to meet an existing customer's need, or an existing customer requires something specific, when you come to the table to say, hey, I noticed there's a gap here, you need to come with 3 solutions. If you're not
Brilliant.
providing a solution, then you need to think on it until you have 3 solutions, or 2, or like something to offer. But to just throw problems back at the team or back at your peers isn't supportive or helpful. So 100%, we want to hear what you think is a concern, but then you also need to think about different ways that we can support a solution. And I think that changes the mindset, as opposed to this sort of negativity
Mhm.
train of like, this isn't going to work, that's not going to work, to, okay, well, how can I champion a change that's going to work with the things that we have? Because often those individuals in those roles are the right people to come up with a solution, because it's right within their wheelhouse.
Right, right. And then actually this is probably a good segue into sort of the middle layer, the project layer, because it's like you shouldn't be expected to do this in a silo all on your own, right? In isolation, you would be engaging people who actually know what can be done in the new system, and then how, like, working together to gather those requirements that are that your client may need, or for this particular report and stuff, right?
And you're bang on, again. So the project team, right? So the second group of the 3 levels that we talked about, the project ERP leadership, they really need to ascertain what their individual goals and activities are based on their role within that leadership group, and making sure they really understand what they're supposed to achieve. So if my job is to understand the current business processes and remap them into the new ERP and make sure we don't have any gaps, then that's your role and activity. If your role is to go through the 7 terabytes of data and ensure that you've flagged or identified known corruption issues, or whatever your job is, that's your goal and your task to achieve. Oftentimes when we have project teams that aren't set up with a really clear mandate, is you'll have people that are operating in multiple buckets, and then you have confusion over whose task it is to do something,
Mm,
who's responsible for an activity, or they're fighting over the same activity. Well, no, that's mine, or I'm dealing with this, and you're this isn't yours. And so making sure that you have that real clear delineation for each of the individuals on your team as the ERP leadership, that they know their goals, they know their activities, they know where they interact, where they don't interact. One of the things I've noticed is that individual contributors on an ERP implementation, um, are usually very data oriented. They're very fact-based. They like their processes and design flows and things like that. And they struggle when things operate in a version of chaos. So if it's not clear, if it's not defined, if it's not written down, if it's interpretive or intuitive, they really struggle with that. And they're like, well, this isn't what I have here, and where does this fit in my process flow? And then they can't manage beyond that. So as a leader, really making sure that that's clear. And if it's not clear, taking the time to define it, or taking the time to include or exclude criteria. One of the things that, especially if you have a bunch of consultants, they like to include a bunch of stuff because that's called a change order.
Yes.
And they don't necessarily exclude anything unless it's like, we actually can't do that. So one of the things we want to be careful with is scope creep.
Mm.
So scope creep happens all the time in every contract known to man. And this is where you're going to have the largest amount of scope creep, is with your with your ERP implementation leadership going, oh, your operational team has requested this, so that's additional scope. Oh, we're going to customize this, that's additional scope. Oh, this wasn't included in the ERP, that's additional scope. And so really making sure, especially if you're in charge on the client or the owner side, to say, no, we're not including this, or that's a special project, or no, we're getting rid of that, and making sure you're really clear and definitive on what's in and what's out, is really what we want to make sure we're managing here. And within those people and personalities, making sure that we have those good relationships. Your ERP implementation team and your overall executive leadership team, as well as your operational leadership team, should all, generally speaking, have a good working relationship. That doesn't mean no conflict, right? Conflict is going to be essential for a good ERP to be implemented, and is necessary as you move through all these processes. But they need to have a good working relationship. It shouldn't be hostile. It shouldn't be, where they never talk to each other, or they talk to each other once every 6 months, or right before a board meeting. It shouldn't be like that. They should have open and honest dialogue on a regular basis. That's going to be really, really essential. It's also essential that the consultants on that team, because usually you would build up a whole ERP team that's a whole bunch of consultants. You're not going to have very many internal people. You're going to have your internal stakeholders that are going to help navigate the business processes, but you're going to have all of those consultants come in, and you're going to want to make sure that those consultants are able to work together. Some level of team building or workshops is going to be essential to get everyone to learn to work together, because most people will have never worked together before, or maybe a handful might have. And so now all of a sudden you're expected to work in a group of 30, 40, 50, 100, 200 to go and implement something. And so, you really need to make sure you take the time to set it up correctly with appropriate workshops, having your change management team facilitate, your conversations, around what it is that you guys are working on, and who's going to deliver, what, and what the tasks and activities are, I think is going to be really essential. This project ERP team is the hub in all the giant machine, like the central cog. If this doesn't work, nothing works. So it's really, really important from a people perspective that you get this really right.
Right.
And you get this right, and you get this group gelling and working well together, the rest of it will start to come together as you start to move through the different layers of people.
For sure. Absolutely. Thank you for that. Couple questions that came to mind. So when you talk about scope creep, I immediately, or somewhat immediately, start to think about continuous improvement and center of excellence. So it's not okay. So center of excellence and continuous improvement are, in my opinion, sort of a newer concept for organizations that have never been through an ERP before, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I feel like that scope creep can be sort of the launch pad of this new group in your organization called the Center of Excellence or Continuous Improvement, whose purpose is because you have to understand that ERP implementations, that's your starting point. right? Like you've got this new shiny new platform, but it needs maintenance like anything. Like you can't just expect to have this one go, like one big push to get it up and running, and then it just ups and runs forever, right? There are new enhancements. There are things that weren't part of that MVP
Hmm.
initially in the initial push that you want to, project out as a later date. So then the question
Hmm.
is, when do you start that? So you got the scope creep, and which happens all the time. And so when is the optimal time to sort of set up and think about that center of excellence, sort of continuous improvement, and who should be involved in that?
Again, you're on point today with your fabulous questions. So that's an excellent question. Normally, you would have a master data team within an organization. So even before you're like, okay, we're running on our or whatever system we're running on, we're doing this net new ERP implementation or whatever jazz you're up to, you should be, or you should have, or if you don't have a master data team, it would be wise to have one before you start your ERP. But within that
So
group,
sorry, just to
sorry,
pause you. For the folks who don't know what a master data team is,
oh,
what does
sorry.
that consist of?
So, sorry, one sec. So a master data team is a team that works cross-functionally with all of the groups within an organization to determine what subsets of data they rely upon, what require certain types of governance like CSOCs, what require multiple authentication factors, and what have a certain standard or format that cannot be deviated from,
Mm.
like a accounting cost prefix and things like that. And so a master data team is going to look at your terabytes and terabytes of data when you move into a new ERP and have some, we'll call them no-fly zones, so areas that cannot be adjusted.
Mm.
So this taxonomy, so taxonomy is a way of describing certain types of things. So this taxonomy for supplier types cannot be changed. We can add new ones, but you cannot change the old ones. You cannot, bulk valves is BV. You can't change BV to BVP. It's only one thing. And so they're going to tell you what some of the constraints they have within their subsets of data are. As you bring in your new ERP, you're going to look at that and go, you know what? I know we have BV for supplier in our taxonomy. In the new system, we can go to 3 characters instead of 2. And your master data team is going to go, that actually sounds really great. And we would really like that because we've run out of room now. And we don't know how to make new taxonomy codes. So we have a whole bunch of doubling up, and we're using a secondary field to differentiate the difference between stainless and carbon bulk valves in the
Mm,
BV
mm.
field. This is an example. And so what's going to happen is that master data team is going to be able to help your ERP implementation team determine the best way to augment certain field types and field type data sets, including adjusting taxonomies. The reason that we care about this so much is because accurate data is so critical. And when we move from one system to another system and we don't have that data tracking just perfectly, what happens is the report outputs are corrupted, and then you have bedlam. So then you're making $20 million more, $40 million less. All of these CapEx expenses ended up as revenue. And so you end up just like as a total nightmare of things because things aren't tracking where they're supposed to be because the code types don't match up, or they're interpreted through the data load as being a different type of code type. So you have to have that understanding of the data structure, and and if necessary, cleansing of the data before you move on to your system. And I think we're way down the rabbit hole here on this one. But the reason that your master data team is so critical to have at the start of your ERP implementation is that master data team is going to really help narrow the field of things that can be changed or ought to be changed based on how the systems currently operate and how certain users input data. And there's going to be only so much that you're able or want to change in your initial implementation. And that's where your question around enhancement or continuous improvement comes in, is that you might have something that's really big, like a taxonomy for supplier codes, and you're like, we really need to do this. And you go, yes, we do. After implementation, it's going to be a net 1-for-1 into the new system, and then afterwards we're going to do a continuous improvement piece to fix these taxonomy codes for this particular item.
Right.
And your master data team can really help you distill those things and navigate your scope creep.
That's fascinating. I actually, like when you said master data team, I did not at all expect you to say that. I did not at all expect you to say the continuous improvement group should start with master data. You're absolutely like that is so insightful. I would have expected something like, oh, we've got these, it might begin with the change managers in the organization and that sort of thing. But I mean, you put out some really, really great arguments as to why, like how critical that data piece is. And that's sort of kind of like we're going to be speaking on data as our next session, should you be game. So we'll save that ammo for our data session. But going back to people, so we covered the board level, sort of the senior leadership. We kind of touched on the project team, how everybody needs to have clear goals and knows what their area is so that they don't sort of step on each other. What's next?
So next is your operational users, right? So these are your, I'm going to call them frontline. So this is the people that are going to, maybe do some testing for you once things start to go live. They're going to tell you how they do their job day to day and interact with the existing system. You're going to tell them how they're going to interact with the next new system. And so a key question for these guys really early on is going to be, how do I know how to do my role? And how is my role changing? And how with this new system do I execute my tasks in it? Because before I'd go to, one screen, then I'd tab, and then I'd go to screen 5, and I knew all my things, and I'd F6 control, and and they can tell you all the clicky buttons that they do, and they're gonna go, well now you want me to like do this and then do that, and so you have to really make sure that your expectations of and the requirements for moving to that next system are going to be enhanced somehow, or they're going to like receive some sort of benefit. 9 times out of 10, moving to a net new ERP produces a huge amount of benefits for those end users, but initially, because it's change, period, they see it as a negative as opposed to a real positive for them to be able to do their job. And as long as you get the data part right, which we'll talk maybe next time about, it will be easier. If you have bad data or corrupted data sets, then they have to export stuff and do manual updates, and that's harder, obviously. But if you have a successful implementation, you don't have corrupted data, this should be a really easy sell to these users to say, this is going to be better for you, but it's change again. So this is where you really need your change management group to come in, provide that level of reassurance, and really work with them. And these are the individuals that you want solutions from, as opposed to criticism. So in this group, if someone brings up something, oh, well, this doesn't work, or that's going to be a problem. All right, how do we solve it? And like let's get you integrated with a working team over here and actively solve this problem. And if we can do that more often, I think you end up having a more engaged group of users when you finalize your implementation and you do your go live, because they've been part of the solution. Oftentimes we have our super user technical person in the ERP team that doesn't have any connection to the organization, that goes and solves the problem, and that's great. And they're obviously, that's what they're there for. They're a consultant and they're very good at their job. But if they can bring that user along on the journey, which may take a fraction of a minute longer, you end up with more buy-in, at the end. And any of your change management teams are going to tell you that, right? You want that buy-in, you want that collaboration, that co-creation of solutions to help bring everybody to the same space.
That's fantastic. Can we talk about how, so these are really like they're great concepts and messages that if you are as an organizational leader, these are the things that you need to consider, engaging your change management, and engaging bringing the user, sorry, I shouldn't say user, they're people um, in with the power user, the super user, so that you've got more buy-in. What are some things that that you have recommended in the past where, so for example, like a mechanism for feedback? Do you know what I mean?
Mm.
Like, how does one actually put this into place?
Yeah, that's a great question again. You're on a roll today. Like, did you have like extra protein this morning for breakfast or something?
I'm actually
Oh,
just like feeding off of what you're giving me, so
high
you're giving
protein,
me
high achievement.
gold. I'm giving you gold right back.
So there's three key concepts that I would bring to every discussion that you have with pretty much any of these groups. But I would start off with alignment. So am I aligned? Are they aligned? So referring to your other counterparts. And do I see any gaps? So number one, are we aligned? Number two is execution, right? No ERP gets implemented without execution. So first thing, like, am I empowered? Can I go do the thing that I'm expected to go do, or do I require additional support, validation, input, authority? Am I empowered? Do I have the tools? Right? Oh yeah, just go into the SQL database and plug it in. I don't know SQL. Right? That's a problem. I'm just joking. But like, do I have the tools to go do that job? Do I understand how to use the tools to go do that job? And then within the execution is, do I understand the goal? So a lot of us can be really busy typing things, but is that the goal? And
Mm,
so, is the goal for me to type out this stuff, or is the goal something else? So do I really and truly understand what the goal is, and I'm working towards that goal that I'm executing on? So I'm supposed to go this way? Yeah, but I'm busy going that way because I don't understand that I'm supposed to go that way. I'm directionally challenged for whatever reason, and I need to get in this direction. And thirdly is roadblocks. So, and this is kind of hard, but sometimes you got to say, am I a roadblock? Am I being difficult or challenging unnecessarily and blocking others' ability to accomplish a task because this change is hurting my feelings,
that's
right?
interesting. That's a hard question to answer.
It is, but if you put it on a screen with PowerPoint presentations and you ask everyone every day and you say, hey, you ask yourself, am I being a roadblock? If you're being a roadblock, ask yourself why. Is it truly a problem that this isn't going to work, or that this isn't meeting some threshold? Or are you upset? Or are you fearful?
Mm,
And really ask yourself that question. And then if you're having a problem as a leader, come talk to me. And it's hard because as leaders, we think it's very transactional and go do the job and tick the box, but 95% of these things are feelings. Like, we're
yes.
implementing change that's feelings.
Yeah.
Like this, it's great and it's exciting and it's a series of ones and zeros and terabytes of data, but it's feelings. My
It's
job is
personal.
fundamentally changing. It's very
Yep.
personal.
Yep. Exactly. Yeah.
And what if I fail? What if I can't do the thing that I've been trying to do really hard for 6 months in this implementation, and I can't do it, or I fail at it, or I make a mistake? I haven't made a mistake in the last 15 years I've been at this company, and now I could make a mistake. And is there room for mistakes in my job at my company?
Right.
So, this becomes a very touchy-feely space
Yeah.
when it comes to roadblocks. And so when you see somebody being a roadblock as a leader, I think you really need to ask yourself, are they really constrained? Because we already talked about tools and we talked about alignment. We feel that we're aligned and we feel that everyone has the right tools. So then we really need to get into, is this a feelings-based roadblock, or is this truly a challenge within the data set or the technology that we need to address? And then are others roadblocks? So am I recognizing somebody else is afraid? And then how can I help them overcome that, whether that's, being a peer or a colleague or as a leader. And then the last one, which is what everyone usually goes to first, but I'm put last here, is do we have a systems and processes breakdown, right? So is our process diagram for procure to pay correct? No, it's totally wrong. We totally missed a three-factor authentication on wire transfers. Like, do you know what I mean? Like, you could totally have a breakdown in process. And that might cause a roadblock. So, but most oftentimes people go to the system and the process first, as opposed to going to the feelings first.
Yeah.
And I think we should put feelings first.
Yeah, anything having to do with IT, like if you've ever worked with anybody in IT, which obviously you have, they, especially developers, they all think they're droids. And then they rely on, because my background is essentially business analysis, right? And so,
Yeah.
like, I'm always the touchy-feely one, or the woo-woo one, because I'm all about the humans.
So they're so right. I laugh. One of my best friends is a senior architect, and for IT spaces. So it's quite humorous, to be quite honest, because it's very true, right? You have this sort of perception of how it should go, and then the reality of the situation.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Very true.
All right. So we talked about just bubbling back up to the sort of the three levels, or three or four levels. We got board level, C-suite. We spoke about that, and then we talked about the alignment of everyone in your project team and organization, operational users. Was there another user group user group? Look at me, people group that we should kind of talk about that is important?
Yeah, so you're gonna have all your functional and operational groups that sit outside.
Mhm.
So HR,
Mhm.
I'll use supply chain because it's my alma mater. Supply chain, you're gonna have your actual operational organization, which may include people that don't touch your ERP at all. They just go and do other things. And so you're gonna have all of those other individuals that may have some to even no involvement within your operational group. It's still really important for them to be informed of the progress and where you're at. And I think that's still part of your change management and your leaderships group, to keep the rest of the organization informed. But you're going to probably, in most organizations, have a large number of people that this doesn't impact, or it has very little impact to. And it's important because you want to recognize that some people are going to be heavily invested and highly invested, and you're going to have other people that have little to no awareness. And as always, that difference can create conflict. And
Mm.
so you're going to want to make sure, especially from a change management and leadership perspective, is that you're giving people enough information so that they can make good decisions when they need to, say, engage with the chief technology officer on a new HR platform, which has nothing to do with the ERP. And the chief technology officer says, "I have no time for you," and then HR gets all mad because, "What do you mean you don't have time for us? We're HR. We're important." And it's like, well, you're not important. It's just we're in the middle of this implementation. Can we please perhaps schedule you for after this is done? And so just making sure that other groups understand that this is the key priority, and it should be readily apparent if it's on your AIP and it's driven down. But you do still need to manage those conversations and the expectations around other people's ability to commit to any other organizational tasks.
Mm-hmm.
So
How do you
that's a really
manage? Sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, how do you manage external consultants, or what should you do to make sure that your system? Because I've worked with a lot of consultants, and some are great and some are absolutely horrid, right? So how do you, first of all, who should be responsible, or is it, you know, multiple individuals from each layer of that organization? But how do you ensure that your consultants are doing what you need them to do, and not just like, here's your system, take off?
Mhm. So that's again a great question. So in every project organization that delivers really fantastic results operates in a military style hierarchy. So this would be no different. And if you've ever read extreme ownership. That would be another great
Jocko Willink.
Yeah. That would be a really good example of operational hierarchy and owning it. That's how I would set up your ERP implementation team. So your project ERP leadership, which would own all your consultants. So all of those consultants would live under that. So I'm going to have a VP of strategic projects and technology, we'll just say, and it's her job to run this entire ERP implementation. And she is going to hire the groups and leaders that are going to hire all the consultants. And so she has a 75-person, say, project organization that gets embedded into the overall organization to go deliver that ERP. Well, it's her job to own that, no different than it would be if she was a commander in a military operation with a bunch of subsets of leadership all the way down to frontline individual contributors. Again, sticking to a 4 to 6 person reporting structure for each leader within that hierarchy. And that's how you would manage it. So if you have someone 3 or 4 layers down that's somehow not managing to do their job as a consultant, there's a very clear structure and expectation that leader has established for that to be communicated up. She deals with the leader in charge of that group, and they make the decisions or provide the intervention as necessary to manage that consultant or the behavior or the outcome. But it's a bit of a decentralized leadership model in making sure that those individual leaders with their subsets of scope are empowered to do their job, they're doing their job, and they're held accountable to get it done in the timeline required with the hours available. And then if it's not going to work out that way, that they're communicating that up and providing that advance notice. But it's all about setting up that communication structure and having a very clear established hierarchy that has quite a bit of a military feel to it. What happens, I find, in a lot of project organizations, if they're too kumbaya, or if the leader likes to jump down too many levels, right? So they like to come down 2 or 3 or 4 levels to be at the front lines and see what's going on. What happens is then you end up breaking apart the decentralized model. People start losing their sense of autonomy and authority, and you end up having then individuals waiting for somebody else to come and help them make their decision, or they defer. Bob came down from on high and told me to do this. Like, what am I going to do? Tell him no? As opposed to going and doing the thing, owning the outcome, and then moving up or down. So, just really watching that, because if as leaders we come down too many levels, or we solve too many problems for our lower level leadership, is they never learn to lead, and they don't learn to overcome problems or solve issues on their own. And as you know, ERP implementations are never problem free. And sometimes people make bad decisions or they make mistakes. And if we don't let people make the mistakes, learn from the mistake, fix the mistake, and then move forward, we actually don't really get anywhere. And so that culture of empowerment, decentralized leadership, and getting people to move through some of the items that they need to move through, which may be considered fast fails or improvements or whatever else, that becomes really critical for a successful implementation. So I really strongly encourage that any of the project groups really function like proper project groups with that military style hierarchy. They work the best. Always work the best, and they work the best with consultants. Most of the good consultants I've seen do enjoy operating with a really standard rigor that they can predict. What happens is when we can't predict it, and we don't know who we're supposed to talk to about something, it creates confusion, and confusion creates chaos, and chaos equals more cash, always.
Yeah. I know about that. I have cashed in on chaos. Right, exactly. All right. So, oh my gosh, you and I, as mentioned, we could talk about this 4 hours. I want to be respectful of your time. And so I know that, and we kind of touched on this previously in our previous session, but I know that you're putting on a webinar, upcoming webinar,
Mhm.
and the last time you had mentioned this, it's hugely fascinating. Can you please reiterate for our listeners what that webinar is and when it is possibly?
Yeah, so in March timeframe, we'll have the exact details in the show notes. In March timeframe, I'm going to be doing a webinar with an environmental group that specifically talks about the greenhouse gas protocol, specifically Scope 3. Scope 3 refers to 15 different criteria that largely relate to supply chain related impacts and how those should be reported. And one of the key items to note in those 15 items is that in order to report on all those, you're going to need some sort of mechanism or database system to do all of that stuff. So IT and the greenhouse gas scope 3 protocol are going to continue to be highly correlated with supply chain in order
Mm.
to collect, audit, and disseminate all that key criteria and information. So I think it'll be a fun one. I'm looking forward to it greatly. And I will make sure that you get all those details for your show notes.
Excellent, excellent. Is this something that is it for a particular group or anybody can register and attend your webinar?
Anybody can attend the webinar.
Okay.
It's being hosted by Eco Canada. Um, ECO.
Mhm.
And yeah, we'll have that link in there, and anyone who's interested in the exciting realm of greenhouse gas scope 3 protocols can sign up and be probably about 45 minutes.
Okay.
And it'll be recorded. So if you can't attend, you could always sign up and then watch the recording later.
Excellent, excellent. And you had mentioned for Canada, but a lot of our listeners actually they reside in the States. So how applicable
Mhm.
would this be I would imagine, I mean, greenhouse gases kind of affects us all, doesn't it?
Yeah, again, you're full of great questions today. So the greenhouse gas scope 3 protocol is an sort of we'll call it a knock on. It's the currently preferred method for calculating carbon and related emissions. And it ties directly to the IFRS, so the International
Mm.
Financial Reporting Standards. So IFRS and the GHG protocol are tied together, and those are used widely, worldly, and for mostly any publicly traded company. So that's all tied together. So it'd be very applicable for anyone in the US, as most of the US organizations that are publicly traded do report based on IFRS standards.
Okay. Okay. And so we will drop that registration link and a link about a description of the webinar in our
Mhm.
show notes. And if you're watching this on YouTube, it'll be in the YouTube description below. Click below. And as always, thank you so much, Stephanie. As always, I immensely enjoy our conversations. We can go on and on forever. So I'm really excited that we have one more session where we're talking about data. We kind of hinted at data in regards to something completely surprising to me in regards to like data and what that has to do with your continuous improvement group that you would, sort of assemble as a part of your ERP implementation. Any final words of wisdom that you'd like to impart on our listeners today?
I'm just thank you again, Kat, for welcoming me to your awesome show. And I'm super duper excited to talk to you next time. Thank you so much for having me.
It is our pleasure. Thank you so much as well.